The first-class cabin hummed softly with the sound of passengers getting comfortable. The leather seats were plush, the air smelled faintly of coffee and fresh linen, and there was a quiet excitement in the air. People whispered to each other, careful not to be too loud, as their eyes flicked toward one particular seat, 2A. Keanu Reeves was sitting there, looking as calm and casual as if he were in his living room instead of thousands of feet above the ground. He wore a simple black jacket and jeans, his hair falling loosely around his face. Despite being a superstar, he wasn't drawing attention to himself. He thanked the flight attendants softly, smiled politely at other passengers, and kept to himself. Most of the people in first class couldn't help but steal glances at him. They whispered to the person next to them, "That's Keanu Reeves, right? From The Matrix, or I saw him in John Wick. He's so cool." It was hard not to be starstruck. After all, how often do you get to share a flight with one of Hollywood's biggest stars? For the flight attendants, though, it was supposed to be just another day. Famous people flew in first class all the time. Most of the crew treated Keanu like any other passenger, giving him the same service they gave everyone else in the section. But for Emily Dawson, this wasn't just another flight. Emily was one of the newer flight attendants on the team. She had only been working for the airline for a few months, but she had quickly become a favorite among passengers. She had a kind smile that made people feel at ease and a gentle voice that could calm even the most nervous flyers. Whenever a passenger needed something, Emily was quick to help, and she always seemed to know exactly what to say. Despite this, her co-workers didn't seem to notice her much. They thought of her as the quiet, shy new girl. She wasn't the loudest or most confident person in the crew, so she often stayed in the background, doing her job without drawing attention to herself. But Emily wasn't just a flight attendant. She had her own reasons for being on this flight. She wasn't here just to serve drinks, pass out meals, and make sure passengers were comfortable. Emily had a secret one she had kept hidden from everyone. Not even her fellow flight attendants knew what was going on. Today was the day her secret plan would unfold. And the quiet man in seat 2A, Keanu Reeves, was about to become part of it. Emily moved through the cabin, checking to make sure everyone's seat belts were fastened and their bags were stored properly. On the outside, she looked calm and professional, smiling at passengers and answering their questions. But on the inside, her heart was racing. She could feel the weight of what she was about to do, and it made her palms sweat. She glanced at Keanu Reeves as she walked by his seat. He was reading a book, his face relaxed and thoughtful. He didn't seem to notice the whispers around him or the glances people were throwing his way. To him, this was just another flight. He had no idea what was coming. Emily took a deep breath and reminded herself to stay focused. She had been preparing for this for weeks, carefully planning every detail. She had practiced her actions in her mind over and over, making sure she didn't miss anything. Everything had to go perfectly. There was no room for mistakes. As the plane began to taxi down the runway, Emily found her seat and buckled herself in. She looked out the window, watching the ground blur as the plane picked up speed. The engines roared louder and louder until, with a sudden, smooth lift, they were in the air. She could hear the familiar chime of the seat belt sign turning off, and passengers began to relax. Some pulled out laptops or books, while others leaned back and closed their eyes for a nap. Keanu Reeves was still reading, his expression calm and focused. Emily couldn't help but wonder what kind of book he was reading. Was it a mystery? A thriller? Or maybe something more philosophical? She shook the thought away and got back to work. As she walked through the aisle, she could feel the nervous energy building inside her. She smiled at passengers and asked if they needed anything, but her mind was racing. She kept going over her plan, making sure she hadn't forgotten anything important. Her co-workers didn't notice anything unusual. To them, Emily was just doing her job like she always did, quiet, kind, and professional. They had no idea that she was hiding a secret. Keanu Reeves remained quiet and unassuming, completely unaware of the role he was about to play in Emily's day. He wasn't just another passenger to her. To him, this flight was just a way to get from one place to another. To Emily, it was so much more. As she walked past his seat again, Emily stole another glance at him. He didn't notice her, and that was exactly what she wanted. She needed him to stay calm and unaware for now. Everything depended on her timing, and she couldn't afford to mess it up. The other flight attendants chatted with each other near the galley, laughing quietly about their plans after the flight. None of them paid much attention to Emily. They thought she was just being her usual quiet self, but they didn't know the truth. Emily's heart pounded as she moved closer to the moment she had been waiting for. Her hands trembled slightly, but she took another deep breath and steadied herself. She knew what she had to do, and she was ready to do it. Keanu Reeves, sitting quietly in seat 2A, had no idea that he was about to become an important part of Emily's plan. This wasn't just another flight. Not for Emily. Not for Keanu. And soon, not for anyone in first class. The flight started as most flights do. Passengers in first class leaned back in their large, comfy seats, sipping champagne and flipping through magazines. The air was calm, the service was polished, and everything seemed perfect. But behind the curtain, where the flight attendants worked, the mood was different. "Emily, pick up the pace. You're slowing us down," snapped Janice, the lead flight attendant. Her tone was sharp, and the words hung heavy in the air. Emily flinched but didn't argue. She nodded quickly, hurrying to finish loading a tray of drinks onto the cart. Emily was used to Janice's bossy tone. Janice had a way of talking to her that made her feel small, like she was always doing something wrong. It didn't matter that Emily worked just as hard, maybe harder than anyone else. Janice always found a reason to criticize her. But Emily didn't fight back. She wasn't the type to start trouble, especially not here, where she had a job to do. Still, as Emily moved through the cabin, the sting of Janice's words stayed with her. She smiled politely at the passengers, offering them drinks and snacks, but inside, she felt the weight of Janice's constant criticism. Then something strange happened. Emily was returning to the galley when she overheard a hushed conversation between Janice and the co-pilot. They were speaking in low voices, their heads close together, but Emily caught a few words. 2A, during boarding, acted strange, Janice said, her voice tinged with suspicion. The co-pilot frowned, glancing toward the first-class cabin. "You sure? Doesn't sound like him. I'm telling you, something's off." "Just keep an eye on him," Janice replied, crossing her arms. Emily's ears perked up. She knew seat 2A belonged to none other than Keanu Reeves. The idea that someone like Keanu, calm, kind, and easygoing, could be causing trouble didn't make sense. Emily had seen him during boarding. He had been polite to everyone, thanking them as he took his seat. There was nothing unusual about his behavior. Still, the whispered conversation between Janice and the co-pilot sent a ripple through the crew. As Emily moved back to her section, she noticed the other attendants whispering too, their eyes darting toward 2A. The once relaxed atmosphere in the galley now felt tense and heavy, like everyone was waiting for something to happen. Janice's voice broke through Emily's thoughts. "Emily, make sure to keep an eye on Mr. Reeves. If he acts up, report it immediately." Emily nodded, her face calm, but inside, her mind was racing. Why was Janice so suspicious of Keanu? What could he have done to make her act this way? Emily's gut told her there was more to the story, but she knew better than to ask questions. For now, she kept her head down and focused on her tasks. As she passed by 2A, she glanced at Keanu. He was sitting quietly, reading a book, his face calm and peaceful. There was nothing off about him. If anything, he looked more relaxed than most of the other passengers. Whatever Janice thought she had seen, Emily couldn't see it. Still, something about Janice's tone stayed with her. It wasn't just suspicion, it was almost as if she were planning something. Emily felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She wanted to brush off the feeling, but she couldn't shake the sense that something wasn't right. She took a deep breath, deciding to stay quiet for now. But she couldn't ignore the little voice in her head, whispering that this flight was about to take an unexpected turn. And somehow, Keanu Reeves was at the center of it all. As the hours went by, the calm and quiet in the first-class cabin started to feel strange. Passengers were reading, napping, or quietly chatting, but behind the scenes, the tension among the crew seemed to grow with every minute. Emily couldn't help but notice it. Janice, the lead attendant, kept exchanging secretive glances with the other attendants. They would whisper to each other, then look toward seat 2A where Keanu Reeves sat, completely unaware of the attention. Emily didn't like it. Something felt off, but she couldn't figure out what it was. She tried to focus on her work, smiling at passengers and making sure they were comfortable. But her mind kept wandering back to those glances, those whispers. Why were they so focused on Keanu? He had been nothing but polite the entire flight. Then, something happened that made Emily's unease grow. Janice approached Keanu's seat, carrying a tray with drinks. Her smile looked friendly enough, but Emily noticed it didn't reach her eyes. It was a sharp, fake smile, like she was hiding something. "Here you go, Mr. Reeves," Janice said sweetly, handing him a glass of orange juice. "Thank you," Keanu replied, his voice calm and kind, just as Emily expected. He took the glass and sipped it slowly. But then, for a brief second, his expression changed. It was so quick that most people wouldn't have noticed, but Emily did. His brows furrowed slightly, and his lips tightened, as if something about the drink had surprised him. Then, just as quickly, he masked his reaction and returned to his calm demeanor. Emily's eyes darted to the glass in Keanu's hand. The juice looked normal, but when he set it down on the tray table, she noticed something odd. At the bottom of the glass, there was a faint, powdery residue, something that didn't belong in a drink. Her stomach tightened. This wasn't normal. Something was very wrong. "Janice, can I take over here?" Emily asked, trying to keep her voice steady. She forced a polite smile, even though her heart was racing. Janice turned to her with narrowed eyes. "No, Dawson," she snapped. "Stay in your lane." Emily's cheeks flushed, but she held her ground. She nodded and stepped back, pretending to let it go. But inside, her mind was spinning. Why was Janice so determined to serve Keanu herself? What was in that drink? And why were the other attendants acting so strangely? Emily decided she couldn't let it go. She had to figure out what was happening. Quietly, she began observing everything around her more closely. She watched Janice's movements, the way she whispered to the co-pilot, the way the other attendants seemed to avoid looking directly at Keanu. Each little detail made Emily's sense of dread grow stronger. But Emily knew she couldn't act on suspicion alone. She needed proof. Whatever was happening, it was bigger than her, and she had to handle it carefully. For now, she would wait and watch. But deep down, she knew this flight was about to take a dangerous turn and Keanu Reeves was at the center of it. The confrontation came suddenly, catching everyone off guard. The plane had just entered a patch of turbulence. The cabin shook slightly, and a few passengers clutched their armrests nervously. Janice, the lead flight attendant, was walking down the aisle with a tray in hand when the turbulence made her stumble. Her tray clattered to the floor, sending glasses and utensils flying. But that wasn't the most shocking thing. From her pocket, a small glass vial rolled out and slid across the aisle, stopping right at Keanu Reeves's feet. The room seemed to freeze. Emily's heart pounded as she stared at the tiny vial on the floor. Without thinking, she stepped forward and picked it up, holding it in her hand. Her eyes widened as she realized what it was. Janice. Emily's voice rang out louder than she intended. Heads turned, and the once quiet cabin was now filled with murmurs and gasps. Passengers craned their necks to see what was happening. Keanu Reeves, who had been sitting calmly moments before, looked down at the vial, his brow furrowed in confusion. "What's this?" Emily demanded, holding up the vial for everyone to see. Janice froze in place, her face pale as a sheet. Her usual sharpness was gone, replaced by panic. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Keanu stood up slowly, his presence commanding even without him saying a word. His eyes moved between Emily and Janice, trying to make sense of the situation. It's nothing," Janice stammered, her voice shaky. "Just a mistake." Emily didn't buy it. She took a step closer, her voice steady and firm. "This isn't nothing, Janice. I saw you. You've been acting strange this whole flight. You've been tampering with his food and drink." "Why?" The passengers gasped, their eyes widening in shock. Keanu's calm exterior cracked just slightly as he looked down at the vial again. Janice's shoulders sagged. The strong, bossy lead flight attendant now looked small and cornered. She glanced around the cabin, her face filled with shame and fear. I didn't mean for it to go this far," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Emily pressed her further. "Then what was your plan? What were you trying to do?" Janice hesitated, but before she could answer, the co-pilot appeared at the front of the cabin. His face was red with anger, and his voice boomed as he spoke. "This wasn't supposed to happen," he barked, glaring at Janice. "You've ruined everything." Emily turned to face him, her eyes narrowing. "What wasn't supposed to happen?" she asked, her voice rising. "Tell us the truth." The co-pilot sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It was a setup," he finally admitted. "We were trying to create a scene. Something big. Something involving him." He pointed to Keanu. "The idea was to stage an incident, something that would go viral and get media attention. But he glared at Emily, "you just had to interfere." The cabin erupted into chaos. Passengers murmured in disbelief, some shouting questions, others leaning forward to get a better look. Emily felt her heart racing, but she stood her ground. She turned to Keanu, who was now looking at her with a mix of gratitude and disbelief. Janice's face crumpled as the weight of her actions sank in. "It was supposed to be harmless," she said weakly. "Just a distraction. We didn't mean for anyone to get hurt." Emily shook her head, her voice filled with disappointment. "You used someone's trust, someone's life, for your own gain. That's not harmless." By now, other members of the crew were stepping in, calling for calm and contacting security on the ground. The co-pilot and Janice were clearly defeated, their plan exposed. As they were escorted to the back of the plane, Emily looked at Keanu, who gave her a small, grateful nod. The truth had come out. And thanks to Emily's courage, it had been stopped before it went too far. The plane touched down with a smooth landing, but the atmosphere on board was anything but calm. Passengers buzzed with whispers about what had just happened. Emily stood near the galley, her hands gripping the counter tightly as the plane taxied to the gate. Her heart was still racing, but a small part of her felt relief. It was over, or at least, almost over. When the plane came to a stop, security officers were already waiting outside. Through the window, Emily could see their serious faces as they prepared to board. She glanced toward the back of the plane, where Janice and the co-pilot sat under the watchful eye of another flight attendant. Their earlier confidence and control had crumbled, leaving them looking pale and nervous. As the officers entered the plane, the passengers clapped softly, their relief and gratitude evident. Emily stepped aside as the security team moved toward the back, placing Janice and the co-pilot in handcuffs. Gasps rippled through the cabin as the passengers watched the two be escorted off the plane. "They deserve it," someone whispered from row 3. "Absolutely," another passenger agreed. The officers thanked Emily quietly as they passed, nodding in recognition of her courage. She felt a strange mix of emotions: pride, exhaustion, and even sadness for what could have gone wrong. But mostly, she felt grateful that no one had been hurt. Once Janice and the co-pilot were gone, the plane seemed to exhale. The tension lifted, and passengers began to smile and cheer. A round of applause erupted in the cabin, louder this time, directed squarely at Emily. She turned bright red, waving a hand shyly as she tried to deflect the attention. "She saved us," an older woman in seat 4C said proudly. "Bravo, Emily," a man from the back shouted. Emily couldn't help but laugh softly, her nerves finally starting to settle. She glanced down the aisle and saw Keanu Reeves standing up, his calm, steady presence cutting through the noise. He walked toward her, his step slow and deliberate. When he reached her, he smiled warmly. "You didn't have to do that," he said, his voice soft but strong. "But I'm so glad you did." For a moment, Emily didn't know what to say. She had been so focused on doing the right thing that she hadn't stopped to think about how much it mattered. Finally, she managed a small smile. "It's what anyone would have done," she replied, though deep down, she knew it wasn't true. What she had done had taken courage, and she felt it now more than ever. Keanu shook his head slightly. "Not everyone would have. But you did." He paused, his expression sincere. "Thank you." Emily's chest swelled with pride. Hearing those words meant more to her than any applause or recognition. For the first time in a long while, she felt truly seen. As the passengers began to disembark, many stopped to thank Emily personally. They shook her hand, patted her shoulder, and told her how brave she was. By the time the cabin was empty, Emily felt a deep sense of peace. She had done the right thing, and everyone knew it. Later, as she walked through the terminal, her fellow crew members, those who had doubted her quiet strength, looked at her with newfound respect. She wasn't just the new girl anymore. She was someone they would never forget. Justice had been served, and Emily had proven that even in the most unexpected moments, courage and kindness could shine through. Sometimes, it's the quiet heroes who make the biggest difference. Emily never thought of herself as a hero. She was just someone trying to do her job, someone who cared about people and wanted to keep them safe. But that day had taught her something important: being brave doesn't mean you're fearless. It means standing up even when you're scared, even when it feels easier to stay quiet. After the passengers left the plane, Emily stood by the gate, watching the scene unfold. Cameras flashed as reporters swarmed around Keanu Reeves. The story of what had happened on the flight had spread quickly, and now everyone wanted a piece of the man who had been at the center of it all. But Keanu, calm as ever, handled it with grace. He answered a few questions, waved politely, and then started walking toward the exit, his face kind but firm. Emily watched him go, her heart feeling lighter than it had all day. She thought about how different things could have been if she hadn't spoken up. If she hadn't trusted her instincts, who knows what might have happened. It wasn't just about protecting a famous actor, it was about doing the right thing, no matter who it was for. As Keanu disappeared into the crowd, Emily felt something shift inside her. It was as if the courage she had shown on the plane had planted a seed of confidence. She wasn't just the new girl anymore. She wasn't just someone who stayed in the background, doing what she was told. She was someone who had made a difference, someone who had stood up when it mattered most. Walking through the terminal, Emily replayed the day's events in her mind. She thought about how scared she had been when she first saw the vial on the floor, how her heart had raced when she confronted Janice. But she also thought about the look on Keanu's face when he thanked her, the applause from the passengers, and the quiet nods of respect from her fellow crew members. Those moments reminded her that bravery comes in many forms. It doesn't have to be loud or dramatic. Sometimes, it's as simple as saying, "Not on my watch." Emily smiled to herself as she stepped outside into the fresh air. The world felt a little brighter, a little clearer. She knew this day would stay with her forever, not because of the fame or the recognition, but because of what it had taught her about herself. She had learned that even the smallest actions can make a big impact, and that courage is often found in the quietest places. As she made her way home, Emily thought about the future. She didn't know what challenges lay ahead, but she felt ready to face them. Because now she understood that sometimes, the quiet heroes, the ones who act without expecting applause or rewards, are the ones who change the world, one small, brave step at a time.